we can often bypass a GBR procedure. And using the small diameter implants also helps us, but not in every case we are successful to do so. So therefore we need to analyze the anatomy, and I showed you yesterday some of the studies that show that the height is normally pretty good. The width might be a problem. Okay, then we have defects in the mandible. It's the same as in the maxilla. We make a differentiation between two-wall defects and one-wall defects. When a posterior mandible is atrophied and we have about 3 millimeters of width, or 3.5 to 4 millimeters, then the resulting defect will be a one-wall defect, and then we cannot do a simultaneous GBR. Today I only talk about simultaneous GBR. That means there is enough bone width to have a two-wall defect. And that's what you see here on top. That's here. That's a two-wall defect. That's a one-wall defect. So implant is outside the bone. So you should not place implants in these situations. Okay, very important differentiation. Okay. What are the important aspects for decisions? You analyze the width of the crest. You analyze the shape. Is it like this? Can you reduce the crest to improve your situation? Very important. And then the third one is the diameter of the implant. Reduce the diameter gives you better chances for two-wall defects. So that's a very important aspect as well. So we have then a different treatment approaches. Again, it's based on the patient anatomy. Here are the risk factors, and here are the treatment approaches. And then we have different timing protocols. And again, in the mandible, you could have an immediate placement, early placement, late placement. Same technique. Are we using immediate implants in the mandible? Never, because that doesn't work. There are ITI fellows who have been using a lot of immediate implants. The most common one was Tom Wilson in Dallas, Texas. And he always told me, yeah, you are too conservative, you should do immediate implants. I said, no, come on, forget it. I have done a few cases, didn't work. When I was in Dallas 2 years ago, he said, Danny, you are absolutely right. I completely stopped to do immediate implants in the mandible. I have seen so many bad complications with biologic infections later on. So that doesn't work in the mandible. So actually he at least learned it. So when we have the treatment options available, as I showed you before, you see I'm not using immediate implants in the posterior mandible. It's mainly for premolars here, few sites here, but not here. That doesn't work. Okay. So what are the surgical approaches when we have small teeth and we have a fatal defect? We go rather short. 4 weeks is quite often. A premolar extraction, 4 weeks later I go in to do the surgery. When it's a first molar, we normally go for early placement with 4 months of healing. Do often socket grafting, and then we can bypass GBR quite often. So we have reduced a lot of the GBR procedures lately in the mandible by doing so for first molar sites. So let us start with early placement, soft tissue healing, 4, 6 or 8 weeks. And I want to show you a case I did many years back, so it has not changed. So this patient came to me and she has had here a loss of retention because of caries at this premolar. And you can also see that this tooth has a problem in it. So that's what we did. So I took the premolar with the caries out. And I also removed the first molar. So you see here the molar extraction and the premolar extraction. At 4 weeks of healing, we went back in, open flap procedure, and you see now that in this area, this is an early placement into a non-healed extraction socket. But you see, we get a very nice two-wall defect. Today, probably, I would use here even an NNC implant, because a premolar NNC, perfect. Strong implant, smaller diameter, tissue level. And the second implant we placed here was a standard implant that was placed in the heel side. The socket is here, and mesial to the socket is enough bone to have a standard implant placement. You just put it slightly deeper, because as you see at the top, the bone is rather thin, but it's getting wide very quickly. Today I might even take that off, but that surgery was done 14 years ago, 2004, if I recall correctly. So the implants were placed. You see then the first implant, the premolar implant, was augmented the same way. Very important now, you see, very important, that this is a two-wall defect, and as you can see here, the defect has a horizontal component. When you put implants in the mandible and you put GPR with bone grafts, see, there is a certain risk that the fillers glide apically. So I always say gravity in these situations is your enemy. So when there is a defect, make sure there is a horizontal component, like a balcony. Because when you put the bone in, there is a balcony, so it sits down, cannot glide further. Very important. So often I take a little diamond drill and refresh the bone. Make a balcony, as you can see. I will show you later in another case. So that your torsion bone goes in, so it cannot glide down. Then the bios on top. When there is a certain risk to glide down, I take a fibrin sealant to stabilize. Sometimes I use tacks, 2 tacks, to stop the filler to glide down. Then the membrane, and then the primary closure. Here you see the primary closure. 8 weeks later, the reopening. See the second implant, the first molar implant, is a non-submerged healing. The first implant, the premolar implant, is submerged because we use GPR. And then you see the reopening is done with a mid-crestal incision, and you remove the keratinized tissue to the side. This is not a punch. Punch is used in the maxilla, but not in the mandible. Mandible, you maintain keratinization as much as you can. Mid-crestal and move to the side. Take the healing cap off, put a longer one in, and then you let it heal. Very quick healing. So that will work beautifully. Okay, this is the patient 10 years later. 10 years. Look at this beautiful bone situation. This was a GPR case. This is the standard placement. You see a little mobility, a little bit remodeling here. 3-unit bridge, screw retained. Okay, this is the case I showed you yesterday, just that is the BLT 2.9 millimeter. BLT 2.9. And you see the patient was referred to us with a single tooth situation here for lateral incisor. And when you measure this is less than 7 millimeters, probably 5.5 to 6 millimeters, mesial-distal space. So you've got to be very careful. You cannot use a standard diameter implant. Even an NNC implant is a little bit much. So then I like to use a bone level implant, because then the abutment starts from the inner surface of the abutment of the implant. And we made a decision, we go here with a BLT 2.9. You see that? The tooth was pulled in private office, so I got the patient already with the extraction done. See, it's very nicely healed. When we opened up, you see the remnant of the socket. So you see a minor defect on the buckle, it's not much. Not much. So we do an implant bed preparation, and you see also when we prepare this, we put it in, and the depth gauge, we take a radiograph. I want to see where we go. I realize I have to change direction a little bit. So we change that, and then the implant was placed. So you see there is enough spacing to the mesial root and to the distal root. The buccal defect is not really big. Then we put the healing cap in. I have to say I don't like these healing caps. They are too bulky. I would love to have a slimmer one. Here you see that when they developed that implant, they did not consult with me, because that was done recently. And they have done these implants mainly based on feedback they got from the United States. And these people are not placing the implants deep enough. They put a bone level implant to the bone crest, which is a big mistake, because it has not a machine surface. When you put the bone level to the bone crest, you're going to get resorption, and then your micro rough surface is in the sulcus exposed. Don't make that mistake. Put them deeper. When you get then the bone level implants, hopefully with a machined neck, then of course you can put them to the bone crest. Then that problem is solved. Okay, so that's why I had a problem to really fit that healing cap in. It's too bulky. We have done an buccal augmentation, minor augmentation. This is what you see here, this whitish tissue. That is the fibrin sealant. It's called TIS-Seal. It's from Baxter in the United States. It's a very nice, it's a fibrinogen and thrombin. You mix together, immediately coagulates, stops then the filler to move around. It's a stabilization factor. So we do that quite often in the manual. And then primary closure. In this case, I did not use a membrane, to be very honest, to save the money for the patient, because of such a small defect. Okay, and here you see now the patient at reopening at 8 weeks, and you see the patient at the 1-year follow-up. Beautiful outcome. Here you see the radiograph, that looks actually pretty good. BLT 2.9. It's a very slim implant, very slim. Okay, now sometimes we want to wait 4 months, and as I said, this is done on purpose. And sometimes you get patients, the extraction has been taking place, and when you get the patient, actually it's already 4 months have passed, then you cannot influence them. Okay, so this would be a case where you do that on purpose. And also that's the case more than, I think, 2004. And I showed you yesterday this, the patient with the computer-assisted surgery. Today we would do a case like this with socket grafting, computer assisting. That means then you have the no flap elevation anymore. So you see how we did it at that time in 2004. You always remove these teeth with root separation, very important. So separate them so you get 2 roots of like a premolar root. So you can limit the trauma to the site. Okay. So we put here in this case collagen plug. Today I will do socket grafting for sure. But I want to show you, this is a 4 months post. Little reduction in keratinized tissue. That could not be done flapless here. Because when you do flapless in a case like this, you're going to lose the keratinized mucosa on the buccal. That's not a good idea. But you see, when it opened up, we have a nicely healed situation, and we do a little smoothing. And then when the implant bed is prepared, it's a standard placement. It's not with GBR. So that is the technique we used at that time. Today we do soccer grafting, and most often we can do flapless. That's a big advantage. And you see here the patient 2004, that was an SLA surface, not as selective. Reopening, here you see then the follow-up of the radiographs. You see here, this is in January, 4 months later, implant placement. And then another 4 months later, we have then the implant placed. Here you see the implant inserted, that's a 4-year follow-up. Other case. Now this is a case where we have had on the buccal aspect a defect. So the patient was referred to me. This is actually the lady I showed you before, the early placement in the maxilla. So that was the lady. She got the first implant here, another one here, now the third one here, canine. So this is 15 years ago. So then at that time she was just about 61 or so. She's now 76. And you see the tooth had a lot of caries, and we could see that here, in this area here, was a defect. So I took the tooth off, put a collagen plug in, and let it heal. And you see, the healing was not uneventful, because we lost a little bit of tissue here, and it took time then to fill up. So this is then 4 months later, that's like this. And when we open it up, you see, we have still had this remaining defect. So that's the defect we had. So, big diamond drill, smoothen it, very important. Implant by preparation, and then you clean out the granulation tissue in the defect to see what is the defect. When the defect has an intact buccal plate, then I do often autogenous bone, bios, no membrane. I don't spend the money for the patient with a membrane, because we overfill it because the buccal wall is intact. That's what we did in this case. So here you see the implant is inserted, and you see that the implant, as the bony wall, is fully intact. So it's like a bathtub. So then often I don't use a membrane, I just fill it up. That's what we have done, and you see that here. Very easy to take that bone. The bone is from the surroundings. You take a scraper and grab it and put it in. And then of course you take bios and overfill it. And then you close it up. That's the primary closure. You see the old fillings of that lady, the old amalgam filling. I told the dentist that before you do the implant crown, please exchange the filling. So get this then amalgam out. In Switzerland, amalgam is completely out. I don't know if you still use amalgam here in Vietnam. In the dental school in Bern, it was abandoned in '92, a long time ago. But we still have a lot of patients with amalgam fillings. Even I had a lot of amalgam fillings when I was a young kid, lots of caries at that time. So then I exchanged them step by step. This is not done in one step. Very careful, because of the amalgam, you can swallow it and then you get the metal into your body. That's not good. So here you see then in 2007, 2 months post, the reopening procedure. And then you see in the meantime the amalgam has been changed and the new crown has been fabricated. You see now beautifully, see the implant is doing quite well. This is a wide body, wide neck implant. That is 3 years post. Here you see the patient 2015, 11 years, that's when I did the other implant in the maxilla. And when I saw her again last Friday, so here you see actually also then a cone beam. When we took the cone beam, look, the buccal wall fully intact. This is the patient now at 15 years. 15 years. I did not take a cone beam now in the mandible, but you can see beautifully how stable the peri-implant bone is at this implant. Tissue level implant, machined neck. That's very low risk for peri-implant pathology. 15 years. Patient is now 76 or so. Okay, now I'll show you the next case. This case has been extracted in private office. And you see the extraction was done due to a huge lesion here. And also this tooth has been removed. So this is number 6 and number 7. And when I got the patient, that was also 2006. You see it was already healed. It was a little bit a tricky patient because she's the wife of the state president of Switzerland, as a top politician. I also treated that president when he was in 1999. I know him very well now, a very good friend. He's now a retired politician. He was a very, very popular politician, very nice guy. So I get the wife to treat, and I said, oh my goodness, what was the problem here? Big lesion. So, see, that's what we got. When we opened up the site, you see a huge defect, huge. So here you see, this is the defect. You see, this is a dry surface. This is SLA. This is not SLactive, because SLactive was initiated in about 2006 in clinical practice. So we take a lot of bone. And of course, where do we take the bone? We take the bone from here. Take the bone, retromolar, and move it a centimeter. Very easy. And then we fill up that defect. It needs to have a horizontal component here, a balcony. Otherwise, it's going to glide. And then a second layer of bios. And then the membrane. Such a bios today always stabilized with fibrine sealant. You will see the other case then. So then we put the membrane on top and we do a primary closure. This is the primary closure. For that you have to release the flap. You have to be very careful in the mandible because of the mental nerve. So you take a fresh blade, stretch the flap and do very superficial incision. Don't go deep. When you hit the nerve, patient has a problem in the mental nerve here. Must be very careful. I'm also very careful to do an incision of periosteum in the lingual aspect. I know that Isra Luhmann shows that all the time, but that's very tricky. Because when you hit a blood vessel in the sublingual area, then you can get major bleedings. Be very careful. Don't do that with a blade there. Take a 2 by 2 and just stretch, and then you can stretch the flap a little bit. So this is the tension-free primary wound closure. So I told the patient, now we are waiting. It's a big defect, we'll see. Okay, and you see what we got. At that time, this is 3 months here. 3 months, still submerged. I told the lady, I do not see too much of new bone formation. We got to wait. It will take longer, big defect. So patient came in at 5 months, still submerged. And you're going to see a little improvement, but still not perfect. Then I told her, I remember Professor Schenk, my teacher in bone regeneration, always said, if you want to foster the remodeling, you have to functionally load. So I told the lady, let's open it up and put a provisional crown on top to get the functional load. And you see now what happens, you see? This is 2 months later, provisional crown, and the bone starts to show up in the radiograph. So this is 7 months. Good. Okay. So then I sent the patient back to private office. She got a final restoration. And here you see the patient at 5 years, 2009, 10 years ago. So it looks pretty good. I told the lady at that time already, this is our next candidate. This is the second premolar that I don't know how long it will last. So that's 5 years later, the tooth is still in place. So actually pretty good. These are the radiographs I showed you before. That's how we started. Then before we put the implant in, this is then the 3 months post. Now have a look here, 5 years. It's amazing. That's Mother Nature. So the remodeling has completely brought back the mineralization in the bone. So the bone is now mineralized. So it looks like normal now. So I was really pleased to see that. How much the Mother Nature has remodeled that bone. So now the defect is completely gone. Okay, now look this one, 12 years. 12 years. The tooth is still in place. Do you see that? Here. Why do I have a radiograph? You see, of course, the periapical I would always take, you see, but the patient came back to me to get a sinus graft here. Then I said, yeah, then we need a cone beam, and then let's take a cone beam 6 by 6, so I also check the implant below. That's always nice. Look this one. This is the implant at 12 years. So the implant has an excellent facial wall, lingual wall, fully embedded in bone. That's how we want to have it. So that was 2016. Guess what happened? She lost the second premolar. I promised you that will not last forever. But then this was removed. That is then 17. So now the patient comes back to me, and the private dentist had extracted number 5. So then what could we do? You see, open up the site and have a direct look at the bone. So this is the implant where we have had this huge defect. We took a biopsy, we put an implant in here, and we have done, of course, here in this implant site, a new bone augmentation procedure. And also here you see beautifully how this implant is fully covered by bone. And remember how much exposure we have there. So we have done an augmentation, membrane on top, closed it up. In the meantime, she's now restored. I have not seen her for a while. I see her from time to time at social events. But then, of course, I cannot check her implant. But I have to recall her. She has been restored in private office, and to document the case to the end. Because now this is 15 years following implant placement at the first time. So this is a very nice long-term case to be documented. Okay, now late placement. Late placement is done when an implant patient comes in and had an extraction 5 years ago. And is fully atrophic. And that's a case I want to show you. He's a veterinary doctor. I know him very well because when I was a student, he was in the medical school, but he became a veterinary doctor then. And he told me that this tooth has been removed about 3 years ago. And he felt that there's no need to get an implant. But then 3 years later, he said, damn, this tooth gap is really disturbing me. Can you help me? So then he was referred to us. And you see when he came in, you see it was heavily atrophied, not too much keratinization. When you look at the periapical, then you see this typical sign here. When it's atrophied, then you see often these like bubbles in the radiograph. That's not a good sign. The good thing is that he has an adjacent tooth to the distal and one to the mesial. So there the bone is white, and because of the root. In the middle is atrophied. And that's exactly what I found. We opened up, and you see it was heavily atrophied. So here you see the implant bed was prepared, and you see that on the lingual, the bone head is perfect, on the buccal it's reduced, and it's a thin wall. So what I take then, and this was done almost 10 years ago, we take the bone down the wall. Because this bone is going to resorb when we leave it, because avascular necrosis. And then you get a lot of osteoclastic activity to get rid of that bone. You don't want to have osteoclasts in your side, you want to have osteoblasts. So I take it off and create a balcony, as you can see. And then we open up the marrow, perforate, like Swiss cheese. We take, of course, here in the back, autogenous bone chips. Very important. So you put an implant in and use the autogenous bone to the buccal to fill up that defect. So that's what you see here. Healing cap on top, and you fill up the whole defect. See, this is the autogenous bone from the patient, from here. You move it 1 centimeter across. And then we stabilize it. This is the fibrin sealant. You see that here. Fibrinogen and thrombin. And it's called TIS seal. It's a Baxter Travel company from Massachusetts. It's a European product. They bought it in Austria. Austrian product. Very nice. I know this product for 35 years. When I was a postdoc, we used it in extraction sites when patients had an anticoagulation problem. Patients without any of the blood factors you see for the coagulation. Then we use this product. It immediately coagulates. So, boom, stabilizes. Okay. Then comes the second layer, BIOS. Low substitution filler. And fibrin sealant or TIS on top. As you can see, it's a shiny, whitish color. And then the membrane on top. Double layer technique. And the closure on top. So we have everything covered up. Here you see then the reopening. Implant is well integrated. I'm sure at that time we have been waiting 3 months because it was it's almost 15 years ago that we have done that surgery. And you see, then the case was restored. Here you see in 2008, the 3-year follow-up, radiograph looks excellent. Good. Then I saw the patient again at 5 years, 2010. So good home care, as you can see here, not too much keratinization, just about 1.5 millimeter. Look the bone, very stable, no problem. So I told my friend, can I take a cone beam just to document the buccal aspect? So he agreed. So that is the implant. You see, it's a very happy implant. It's smiling face. And look the buccal plate. The buccal plate fully intact. And you remember how much defect we had. And you remember we had a balcony type defect to stabilize the bone grafts so they cannot glide down. Okay, so this is a quite interesting implant. I have not seen that patient now for a while. I have to recall it because it would be 14 years. In 2020 it would be then 15 years. It would be a very nice time point to see him again. So he's in private office, they are maintained in private office. Good, let me summarize. we are doing quite fine. Okay, the conclusion. So, when we do the posterior sides, don't compromise on that buccal aspect. When there is a lack of bone, then rebuild the bone. When you cannot get rid of it by shortening the crest, using a smaller diameter, then go for the GBR. It's not as often as we did it in 10 years ago. We have improved there. But of course, when there is a need for GBR procedure, I don't hesitate to do the GBR procedure. It works very well. We use most often the early placement when there is fresh extraction site, but we also use the early placement with 4 months, as I showed you, and then we try to do socket grafting to bypass the GBR. Now, when we go back to early placement in aesthetic sites, I have put together a video clip. Now let's see, can you give me the sound? Because it has a sound. I want to show you this in detail. So that's not my sound. It should be a speaker. Let me see if my laptop has to be turned. Ah, that's right. But this should be. So we try again. Good.
And a wide band of keratinized mucosa. The middle view shows well-maintained papillae.
This case is on the ITI,
Incisions performed
on the ITI platform. It's an ITI video from Bern, but I gave them to the ITI to be used.
The blade is introduced deep into the socket towards the inner.
Can you increase the sound?
To allow mobilization of the soft tissues inside the socket as part of the full thickness flow.
Leave it like this.
A sulcular incision is extended around the canine, followed by a papilla-based incision between the canine and the first premolar. The vertical releasing incision is applied as a distal line angle incision at the first premolar. The elevation of a triangular
triangular
is initiated in the distal
premolar. Only one releasing incision. Here at the first premolar.
It is carefully carried out with a fine papilla periosteal.
You see, we try to grab the tissue inside the socket as part of the flap.
The soft tissue inside the socket is mobilized with a spoon-shaped curette and moved to the facial aspect, thereby loosening the flap in the edentulous area. This is done very carefully to optimize the thickness of the flap in this area. It's important to debride the surgical field to have good visual access and to ensure the elimination of soft tissue remnants from the socket. The mucosa on the palatal aspect is also
very important. You see that you also mobilize the flap a little bit to the palate to check the height of the palatal wall. Normally the palatal wall is very thick. That's very good. Because when you put a bone level implant in, the shoulder has to be below the crest on the palatal side, subcrestally located. Very important. Okay, now you see that the width of the crest, mesially and distally, is more than enough to place an implant. This is a lateral incisor site. So this case will get a narrow diameter bone level implant, also a 3.3 millimeter bone level implant, and because it's a lateral incisor. This surgery was done more than 5 years ago, so roughly 5 years ago. I remember very well. The lady came and told me, you see, that she has a problem. Actually, this patient is the role model of the animation video I showed you. It was copied from the company, from this two-dimensional video, as you see now. And she told me that she had a fistula, external root resorption, and she told me that October 2nd she's going to have a wedding. And she doesn't want to go to the wedding with a partial denture, removable. And I saw the lady end of June. Said, yeah, that is quite tricky, you have to speed up. So everything was done in 6 weeks intervals. Extraction, 6 weeks later, implant placement, 6 weeks later, provisional restoration, and then the wedding. She's happily married so far, but I know has 2 kids. And she's now 5 years in healing. As I have not seen her for 5 years, but we'll see her soon. Okay. Now we start to collect the bone, blood and bone. At that time we did not take the blood as we did today, just the bone.
Is now exposed to allow the collection of bone chips with a sharp bone scraper produced by Hugh Freedy. This surgical instrument was specially designed to harvest bone chips of 1 to 2 millimeters in size. These bone chips are kept wet and stored in a separate sterile glass dish. The future implant site is
Now we analyze the site. We take the bone, put them into the mixture of the patient's own blood mixed with Ringer solution. And as I told you, the bone chips release instantly this TGF-beta growth factor, which is the proliferation growth factor. The BMP takes longer, but the BMP2 you see will come then when the bone chips are in the defect, and that's more than enough. Okay, then we analyze the site and we start to prepare the implant bed. That's the next step. What you see the lady here? This is Gabby. She's my dental assistant for 38 years. So she's a little bit younger than me. She has to continue to work. I go to retire. She's almost like my second wife. Half lady, sometimes. And she smokes.
The three-dimensional position, angulation, and depth of the implant bed is checked with a depth gauge. The axis must be located palatal to the incisor edge. In this case, the axis must be corrected with the next spiral drill to orientate it slightly more to the palate. The depth of the implant bed is 15 millimeters. This is sufficient to place the platform of a 12 millimeter implant 3 millimeters below the future gingival margin. It's also important to position the implant below the crest level of the palatal bone wall.
Listen carefully.
Next, the 2.8 millimeter spiral drill is used to widen the implant bed.
So the second drill corrects the axis.
The head of the contra-ankle handpiece.
This is brain guided. You need your brain position experience. And it's like in your blood. Gut feeling. I know exactly where to place the implant.
But the implant
that's very simple.
Is correct. The occlusal view also confirms
so this is not perfect
facial position. Having the implant positioned 1.5 to 2.0 millimeters palatal to the future point of emergence. The preparation of the implant bed is completed with a profile drill for a diameter-reduced bone-level implant, which corresponds to the neck configuration of the implant. The drill is introduced deeply, slightly deeper than the position of the future implant, to avoid a compression of the bone wall by the implant. The drill mainly takes bone off at the inner surface of the palatal bone wall, which is intact. Prior to implant placement, the implant bed is debrided again. The crater-like defect on the facial aspect of the crest has been caused by bundle bone resorption following extraction.
Okay, very important point here. Now I have modified this technique as well, you see. As you have seen, I used here a curette to clean out. Today I ask for a small diamond drill and I freshen the bone to take all these remnants off. Because all these remnants have to be resolved if you leave them in place. So you want to have bleeding bone there, bleeding bone. The width of the crest is very nice. This is a V-shaped defect, as you will see later on. So, and it's a small diameter, or the narrow diameter bone level implant. So you can have a very nice two-wall defect in the crestal area. Okay, next step now is the placement of the
implant is characterized by a hydrophilic SL active surface, which will enhance bone apposition during early wound healing. Implant insertion is done with a drilling machine called
look here,
chiropractic,
beautiful tool
that can be controlled with a tablet computer. The insertion speed is set.
This is the VNR machine.
The vertical position of the implant shoulder is now checked. The implant shoulder must be placed 3 mm below the future gingival margin. Since the lateral incisor is slightly shorter than the central incisor, it is decided to position the second hole at the insertion device at the level of the cemento-enamel junction of the adjacent central incisor. As a consequence, the implant must be inserted deep to the correct level. Following removal of the insertion device,
now look here,
the site is examined again.
Implant
as expected,
located now you can see it is below the crest to the palate. To the medial to the bottom,
healing cap is placed
to the medial and to the distal. On the buccal is a defect.
The lateral mirror view demonstrates the correct vertical position of the implant shoulder and the crater-like bone defect with a fake.
So you see two-wall defect, about 3 mm to the future mucosal margin, and the implant shoulder is subcrestally located to the palate, to the mesial, to the distal. The healing cap is mandatory because the healing cap gives you a chance to augment to the healing cap, to the rim. So that gives you a chance to grow the bone more correct than the implant shoulder. If you use the 0.5 mm healing cap, it's a big mistake. Don't do that. This is even a 3.5 mm healing cap because of the highly scalloped anatomic situation. So the healing cap also supports your membrane, which is very good. So everything is ready. Now before you apply the bone, you have to open up the marrow cavity in the apical area because this is all cortical bone and that will not heal without these perforations.
View demonstrates the correct vertical position of the implant shoulder and the crater-like bone defect with a favourable two-wall defect morphology. To facilitate a tension-free primary bone closure of the periosteum is released with an incision at the base of the flap using a fresh 15 blade. The bone defect of the facial aspect needs to be augmented with contour augmentation using GPR.
This is the perforation section.
As a
so you see the bleeding
cortical bone surface of the augmentation area is perforated with a 1 mm drill to open the marrow cavity and ensure bleeding. Then, autologous bone chips that were stored in blood in a sterile glass dish are picked up. The bone chips are applied to fill the bone defect and to cover the exposed implant surface.
So this is
autologous bone chips
osteogenic
are autografts
potential.
and contain non-collagenous
This is going to make the osteoblast crazy,
which
like
are expected to enhance and speed up new
they
bone
want to
formation
produce bone
during initial
immediately.
healing, if needed. Additional bone chips can be locally harvested with the bone scraper and placed directly on the recipient site. Next, deep BBM particles are applied to over-contour the local bone anatomy.
Well, this
They
is
are placed as a second layer on top of the autograft
composite
chips.
A
The
low
augmentation
substitution bone
serves a
filler.
healing cap to establish a facial bone wall coronally to the implant shoulder.
I know that Botis has a similar product. I don't know the name. I don't use it. I use Bios because we use it for 25 years, very successful, but of course there are
more stability over time
fillers with similar characteristics
on the facial aspect of an implant-born crown.
These are two ITI scholars here. One is from Turkey, Yelis, and the other one is actually from Chile, Ivo Vodic, both ITI officers today. Both very successful guys.
In a vertical direction. The collagen membrane, known under the Geistig trademark BioGuide, is very well documented with numerous preclinical and clinical studies. Following application, the hydrophilic membrane is moistened with blood. This makes the membrane soft and easily adaptable to the local anatomy.
See, membrane is applied. BCS blood is used to moisten,
but also stabilize and keep the applied bone fillers in place.
And now you stuck it underneath the palate
successful regenerative outcomes of GPR procedures. Then, the second membrane layer is applied in a horizontal direction in the crestal area,
so
where bone regeneration is critical
technique
for a successful aesthetic outcome. This double layer technique not only improves the membrane stability in the defect area, but also the barrier function of the applied membrane. The surgery is completed with primary wound closure. This view again confirms the excellent thickness of the flap, which favours an aesthetic outcome. The flap is repositioned and secured in place with the first interrupted suture in the distal corner of the flap.
Today I often use vertical
non-resorbable suture material is used.
Pull up the flap.
The suture material is not lightweight and has excellent handling properties. The flap is pulled distally to allow precise flap adaptation and primary wound closure. Special care is given to avoid a blanch.
Now, as I said before, mandible, gravity is your enemy. In the maxilla, gravity is your friend. Because patients are upside like this, the fillers tend to move towards the crest. So that helps a lot.
In the medial corner.
But you have to tell the patient not to go and constantly press. Leave the wound alone.
The closure is completed by suturing.
I tell my patients all the time, don't touch your wound. Because when they go and test, is it still hurting? That is silly to do. Okay, the primary closure has been achieved. Reopening procedure at 8 weeks. And then in this patient, you see instantly a chair-side provisional on a Tuesday afternoon, Saturday wedding. That was tight schedule. Here you see the reopening, and you see the provisional she got from Julia Whitney. So 5 years ago. So here you see the periapical at completion of the chair-side provisional. And you see at 6 months still with the provisional. I have to say, you see that the patient went back into private office and got then a final crown by the referring dentist. See, I would have preferred to do it at the dental school to maximize the aesthetic outcome, because then when the patient came back, you see that's the final crown, that's 3 years. Then she complained that the color of the crown is not the best, a little bit yellowish, she said. What I don't like, of course, that's actually the shape of the crown. That's not good shape. Goes too quickly like this. This is going to cause not an ideal tissue adaptation. The crown should be much more slim. So this is not a zirconium abutment. This is one of these, how you call them, I can't remember. You see these metallic abutment. You see that goes like this. And I don't like it. So we will have to recall the lady to see. We could not, 17, we could not take then a radiograph because she was the second time pregnant. And that's why we had to skip that. And we will see now where she is. Good. With that one, I'm going to take a break now for lunch. We have